Enter into the magical world of fantasy with mythical creatures and wizards that make our wildest dreams a reality.
You're a wizard, Harry.
Many people believe that fantasy is all about magic, but it is much more than that. It is a genre for those who cannot leave their childhood behind and yearn for adventure. It offers insight into a new world, a world of different social structures, cultures, and history, which allows the reader to escape reality.
Fantasy literature includes legendary characters who represent transformations of basic human characteristics. Their actions are usually based on classic roles and archetypes instead of self-motivation. Settings of fantasy can be imaginary, seeing that the world is more symbolic than literal. It tends to follow heroes' journey of birth, growth, and death. Fantasies are known to be repetitive, with less figurative language since the setting itself represents a metaphor.
There are animal fantasies which personifies animals, enabling them to behave like human beings. Similarly, in toy fantasy, authors bring their childhood treasures and belongings to life as they begin to behave like a person. Characters with magical powers or extraordinary objects can travel to alternate universes where they develop their personalities. Plus, heroic fantasies involve flawed characters on quests, searching for treasure or justice when their conflicts at hand are usually between good and evil.
Common themes found in fantasies include fear of loneliness, a reaction to society, good versus evil, friendship and loyalty, love, and personal growth. The evolution of fantasy answers two important questions. Why do people create, and what is the connection between history and literature? The fantasy we know today, modern fantasy, has developed from elements of ancient stories, including epic poetry, fairy tales, folk tales, and myths, which were orally passed down.
The Odyssey, which is set in the 12th century BCE, was passed down orally until Homer transcribed it in the 8th century BCE. After serving in the Trojan War, Odysseus struggles on his journey home as he is forced to battle mythical creatures. This serves as a metaphor for life's journey, battling hardships, lust, hatred, and trickery. The Odyssey was believed to be a historical account of an earlier time, when gods still frequented the earth and godlike mortals populated Greece. Homer's own time affected his version of the Odyssey, displaying the connection between history and literature. For example, the social structure in the Odyssey has more similarities to Homer's Greece than to Odysseus's, where Homer substitutes his own day's deities instead. The Odyssey's journey, creatures, and morals remain at the base of many modern-day fantasies.
Similar to the Odyssey, Beowulf has many mythical creatures and fantastic elements but is not usually thought of as a work of fantasy. By this time, fantasy did not exist as a separate genre. Rather, stories incorporated mystical creatures, a structure, and a setting that influenced today's fantasy novels. Beowulf originated as an oral epic poem in the 5th-6th century Scandinavia and was eventually written in 1010 AD. The story centers around the hero Beowulf, who is victorious in battling the monsters Grendel and his mother, but eventually dies to a dragon. Three major themes are loyalty, reputation, and good versus evil, as Beowulf staunchly defends the Danes against the monsters' threats. It reflects the time it was written as it combines Norse paganism with Christianity, which began to spread to Scandinavia in the 700s. Beowulf continuously credits God with the successes against evil, which are only earned through courage and humility, traits later found in fantasy characters.
In the Elizabethan era, A Midsummer Night's Dream was written by William Shakespeare as a comedic play. Its major themes are love and magic, while featuring a love triangle, elves, sprites, fairies, and a half-donkey. Shakespeare emphasizes the magical dreams of his characters, questioning whether the life of the waking or the dreaming is reality. The characters answer this differently throughout the play, showing that magic is in the eyes of the beholder. These magical elements would continue to appear in fantasies that developed over the next few centuries. Charles Perrault, author of fairy tales such as Cinderella and Little Red Riding Hood, created a new fantasy subgenre, fairy tales. Many of his works had already existed via oral tradition. By writing them down, he inspired a new wave of fantasy narratives that could reach a broader audience. Also, this allowed Disney to create a movie adaptation that stayed true to his version.
During the Victorian era, Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland commented on the social aspects of his time period. Alice follows the White Rabbit down a hole and enters an imaginary world with crazy characters such as the Cheshire Cat, Mad Hatter, and Queen of Hearts. She later wakes up only to find it all a dream. Therefore, like Shakespeare, Carroll blurs the line between dreams and reality. Carroll purposefully portrays Alice as an obedient follower of Victorian rules, proper and logical, whereas the characters in Wonderland are nonsensical. Surrounded by these characters, Alice is the odd one, showing how the strict rationality of the Victorian era was indeed irrational.
The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, written in 1900 by L. Frank Baum, clearly depicts the themes of friendship and good versus evil and features an alternate universe with talking animals and flying broomsticks. This is when fantasy is truly developed. It has many similarities with the Odyssey and Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Dorothy, like Odysseus, faces many obstacles on a journey home. In the land of Oz, she makes an enemy out of the Wicked Witch of the West. Only with the help of her non-human friends, a scarecrow, Tin Man, and lion, can she be successful. Like Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, she returns home by clicking her heels only to awake from a dream. This once again questions the boundary between dreams and reality.
In 1937, J.R.R. Tolkien wrote The Hobbit. Set in Middle-earth, Bilbo Baggins embarks on a journey with a wizard, trying to regain the kingdom of Erebor. Bilbo's hero's journey in The Hobbit is seen in previous literary works, demonstrating how all fantasies contain the same central elements. Tolkien is deemed by many as the father of modern fantasy. He took great influence from early and Middle English, specifically Beowulf. In fact, he attributed Beowulf to his plots in Middle-earth setting for The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. For example, Bilbo steals a ring from a dragon, Smaug, while Beowulf stole a jeweled cup from a dragon. Tolkien also influenced the Harry Potter series and ushered a new style of writing. Previously in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Alice and the other creatures were displayed as static characters. However, Tolkien created dynamic characters that grew with the plot. In other words, Tolkien added a new degree of complexity to his characters that had multiple motives.
From 2005 to 2008, Stephenie Meyer's Twilight series took the world's attention. Taking place in Forks, Washington, Bella finds herself entering a love triangle between a vampire and a werewolf. She faces danger due to mingling with these supernatural creatures. Twilight popularized the paranormal aspects of fantasy novels, which included vampires and werewolves. Although vampires had existed in Greek and Roman mythology, Meyer gave them a new take, displaying them as good rather than evil. Also, European folklore featured werewolves, which Meyer pitted against the vampires. The series differs from many other fantasies because it takes place only in our world and gives powers to the people that surround us, a change that once again exemplifies the evolution of fantasy.
Over time, fantasy has developed from oral stories rooted in myths and religion into novels that provide an escape from reality. However, many elements found in earlier stories can be seen in later works such as the hero's journey and themes of love, friendship, and good versus evil. This is likely due to the universality of the human experience. Through the transformation of fantasy, history affects literature by causing writers to reflect on their times and the times before them. Therefore, people create to express their beliefs and fulfill their own desires to be heard.